Welcome to the Zoë Routh Leadership Podcast, your source of strategies and insights to make you a better leader. Influence, improve, inspire.
Hi, this is Zoë Routh, and I am thrilled, beyond thrilled actually, to have Stephen Scott Johnson on the webcast today. He is an expert in organizational change with 20 years experience in global business. He has a background in digital innovation and social sciences, and he believes that it's the systems that liberate organizations for collaboration. And his work is really about transformation. He's worked with some major companies around the globe, focused on helping organizations become resilient and conscious leaders who transform culture and society. He's the author of the about-to-be Unleashed on the World book called Emergent, The Future of Culture, a practical guide of leading transformation. And the reason I'm so excited to have Stephen on the call and to get this book out into the world and to read it myself fully is that I believe that Stephen's work is transformational in itself, and that this will be an elevation of consciousness in leadership and around the globe that we haven't seen before. And I believe his message about culture and collaboration and transformation is critical for all leaders worth their mettle. And this is a must-have book if you want to elevate your leadership thinking. So I'm so delighted you're here, Stephen.
Oh, thank you, Zoe. It's an absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Yay! And we also have to introduce Alex, of course. So Stephen let me know that he's sitting where he is with Alex, the black Persian kitty cat. So we have an eavesdropper who's lending support to the podcast as well.
That's right. She's currently sitting on my lap.
Awesome. She will give us some feedback whether it's good or not.
That's it.
Cool. Well, you know what? I love backstories, so I am fascinated by them. And I want to know, how did you actually get started in doing organizational change on a global platform? Because you don't wake up one day and all of a sudden you're doing this amazing work. So tell us about that.
Sure. That's actually a great question. I worked for a long time in advertising, not in the actual traditional advertising side, but I worked within global agency in digital innovation, and the work was much about using statistics and online forensics to understand the who and the why around how people were engaging, the sentiment of what they were talking about, what was actually driving and influencing that activity. And we were measuring and mapping all of that stuff and using that as a really useful tool for brands and for our clients to help them engage more authentically and with a lot more insight into what their consumers were wanting and needing and interested in. And through that work, I was approached by a number of different causes over a period of time to help them give them insight into category trends and things like that. And one of the big challenges for the social causes is that the systems that they use to fundraise or to mobilise awareness and action are very, very old school, and they were kind of needing to understand in order to mobilise people around a movement per se, they really needed to have insight into how what were the conditions that caused that kind of stuff to flourish? How did it happen? And so it just began as a big experiment, and using the data that we were collecting through these online forensics to really understand and to just try new things. And we had a very successful campaign with Live Earth, and which was the Alliance for Climate Protection, and helping them create awareness around climate change and environmental impacts, and really distilling that big idea of climate change into everyday actions that people could do in their homes and in their communities to influence some kind of change. And it just really started there. That was the very first thing.
Well, cool. First of all, the question about that, is that information available still? Like the everyday?
Well, Live Earth has kind of evolved to become, I mean, it's the Alliance for Climate Protection. They now do like Earth Hour and, and all of that stuff. So all of these movements evolve and change, over time. And we're going back 10 years now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it was. I didn't just fall into the work, but it just kind of evolved, and I started to learn a lot about movements and a lot about the conditions that can be codified to help those things flourish. And and the next one we did was the World Malaria Envoy, which was the Envoy to Malaria for the United Nations, and that was something we launched out of Australia with UNICEF. Very similar thing, and that became the World Malaria Envoy. It started as this tiny movement called the Undercover Movement, and a whole lot of really good things happened. And that was all focused on raising money for insecticide-impregnated nets in endemic countries.
Wow.
So there was a whole lot of really interesting work happening around it, and the whole time, so over a period of 4 or 5 years, initially, I was, trying new things. It was that whole test, fail, learn and adapt cycle, where we were, failure was a very important part of the success, if that makes sense. We were trying really new and different things and very experimental strategies, and it just kind of evolved from there.
Cool. And so I'm wondering, online forensics sounds very complex and advanced for one, and I think there's probably, since you started doing this, there's been a lot of advances in it. I'm more interested, I'm interested in that. I'm also interested in what you talked about in using online forensics to map out the conditions that allow a movement to take hold. Is there a generic set of conditions that apply to movements, or how organizations or communities can leverage those conditions? Is there a standard or a map for that?
There, in essence, what I'm talking about is being able to map the conversations, and the technology that we were using was very geeky, with stuff that has evolved into tools like Radian 6 and Meltwater Engage and Meltwater Buzz, and various social media platforms to monitor mentions and conversations and things like that. But what we had was the more enterprise version of that, which was visualizing the radial degrees of reach of conversations, so we could literally see where a conversation started, and then the connections that caused that to explode into some big kind of thing. And an example I'm thinking about is when the baby formula was contaminated with melamine, and all those babies started dying in China, and we were engaged by Kraft to monitor the conversation, because it was a Fonterra crisis in terms of the PR nightmare that was unfolding around that. But Kraft were pulled into it because they were a shareholder in Fonterra. And we were using the insights from the conversations to help them actually engage the community really authentically to mitigate that crisis. As awful as it was, we were able to literally see how the conversations about infant mortality were escalating, and the context around those conversations, and pretty amazing stuff. But essentially, when you're talking about codifying a movement, you're codifying a process of connection, initiation and transference. So it's connecting with an idea or a concept, and then initiating someone to a specific set of asks or actions that you need them to do, and then giving them the skills and tools to transfer that to the next person. And if and that's a bit that can be codified. But there's an aspect of a movement that can't be codified, and that's the fire. That's the, I guess, the passion. Do you know what I mean? That's got to come from within, and that's to do with values alignment and the things that really light you up.
Well, that makes sense to me. It's interesting that you can create all these patterns for how to get the message out, and it comes back to the core message of your why and your purpose, and how meaningful it is. So do you think...
Absolutely.
So do you think the difference between a successful movement and one that is unsuccessful, given that they have equal passion, is really this codifying aspect with the connection, initiation, and action? So you believe that that's the key in terms of the success of the movement or not?
Well, I mean, in my book, I've developed a methodology called Catalyst, which is it focuses on three key areas, and that is the positioning of values and message and manifesto, and then the performance being the essential systems and tools that people need to be equipped with to get the job done or to do that action. And then there's the partnership. So it's positioning, performance, and partnership. And the partnership is really about what are the internal and external alliances that need to be forged to help it sustain. And a big mistake that organisations make in change, and what I'm doing essentially is looking at how the principles of large-scale social change can be applied to, large-scale social change can be applied within organisations to drive strong culture and culture of innovation and help them sustain that. One of the big mistakes that organisations make, and even some movements make, social, like grassroots movements, is that they invest all the energy into positioning or performance or partnership, but they don't actually get a cadence going around all three simultaneously. Right. And that's what I believe is the secret to helping a movement sustain. So coming back to your question about why do some flourish and why do some bomb out, I reckon it's that reason. They focus on either looking at all purpose and story and why, or all performance, like they focus too much on platform and systems, or they and tools and equipping people, or they focus all on partnerships. And meanwhile, the other two are lacking. It was very interesting, Zoe. I had an amazing opportunity to meet with Simon Sinek when he was in Melbourne a few months ago, and
so excited for you, by the way. I'm such a fangirl of his. So I almost had a meltdown when I saw the two of you together. It was awesome.
He's such a lovely guy. We ended up having this incredible conversation around people we know who are, agents of change, doing really extraordinary work on the fringes of business and society. And he said, he goes, I know these incredible people that burn out because they're all, why and what, but they lack the essential how. And he was saying to me, I'm very excited for you about your book because, you've actually codified a system that can help organisations not have to, hack the how anymore. They can actually apply these principles to give sustainability to their work. And I was just so excited by that because I hadn't really thought about it like that before. But yeah, it's a pretty amazing thing when someone like Simon Sinek says to you, you should be very excited.
Yeah, I'd be excited by that too. Oh, for sure.
I was surprised.
Well, a delightful surprise for sure. And I think he's right. Like, I work with a lot of industry associations who are very purpose-driven and very focused on what they need to do. And if you have the secret ingredient in terms of how to make it sustainable, that's going to be critical, because you're right. People do get fried. They get fried over their purpose, and there's just so much work to do. And knowing that there's a framework and knowing that there's a cadence to take to it that will build positive momentum is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, one of the things that I think relates to this, Zoe, is if you look at the old system of marketing and advertising versus movements, you have one that is I define it in my book as the difference between a rocket and a ripple, and essentially a rocket is broadcast awareness and media driven, and it's very costly to keep that rocket in the sky. And if a campaign is, and we're talking the difference between campaigns and movements per se, and if your campaign has no media behind it and no fuel and resources to keep that rocket in the sky, then your campaign has zero visibility. Whereas a movement is people-powered engagement and awareness, and therefore it's perpetual. As long as the conversation is going, those connections are being made, and that's where the connection, initiation, and transference element comes in, and it progressively scales. So even if there aren't big bursts of activity happening, there's always awareness and always connection. So that's just something to consider around, when thinking about the differences.
That's awesome. So I want to talk a little bit about a couple things from your book. And one of them is, because there's so many huge concepts in it, and one of them is about the phoenix as a central theme. Tell me a little bit about that. What does that got to do with organizational transformation?
Well, the phoenix, I was really looking for a metaphor that described the pressure, the challenges, the fire that we go through when we are transforming. And really, if we think about the spotlight that organisations are under to be more authentic, to be radically transparent, to be more human, to stop with the BS and the soul-sucking practices that really disconnect people from and help make them actively disengage. I was thinking, this is not about becoming something else. This is about becoming something more, and your history and who you are and where you've come from is a vital part of where you move to in the future and how you sustain in the future and how you innovate. So you don't want to knee-jerk and reactive change. You want to actually consciously transform. And I was thinking, we're talking about a phoenix here. The phoenix, its ability to be reborn from its own ashes implies that it is immortal. And so I thought, wow, that's a powerful metaphor for sustaining cultures of innovation and for organisational change. And that's kind of where it started for me. And then the more I delved, of course, into the story of the sacred legend of the phoenix, it's just a rabbit hole that when you go down, you just can't get out of. It's just so fascinating.
It is a pretty powerful metaphor. Do you think there's something intimidating about it, though? I'm just curious, this whole idea of burning to ashes to reinvent yourself. Or have I missed something there a little?
I think that I think it's a beautiful metaphor. I think when we're talking about truth, and when we're talking about people wanting to be connected to stuff that lights them up, change used to be something that was very top down, very command and control, very done to people. Whereas when we're talking about conscious transformation, it's an invitation to become something more. And I think the fire is, not necessarily sure, the phoenix is burned to ashes and reborn reborn anew, but the fire is really a metaphor for the pressure and the disruption and the risk that organisations face and experience on a daily basis. So I don't think it's something to be afraid of, but it's really something. It really is an invitation to become something more.
That's great. That's a great clarification, and I like that. I think you're right. Organizations do face that pressure on a daily basis, and to dismiss that, I don't think we'd be facing reality. I'm curious, though, because this leaving behind the command and control way of going about business, whether it's business as usual or transformation business, into this new concept that you talk about, which is focused around collective benefit and co-creation and co-ownership. That is a whole new way of experiencing leadership and followership, because it's not really leadership or followership anymore. Can you tell me a little bit more about those concepts?
Yeah, so what we've really come from is an information age to an enlightenment age. And in one sense, in an information age, if you think about performance reviews, for example, and the way people's performance is measured in organisations, it's through ticking boxes and those very static, disengaged processes. And and we're now in a situation where people are more connected than ever, and the things that we're passionate about in our daily life are so far removed often from the work we're doing. And so the way we bridge that gap and actually solve that, that's at the root of the culture and engagement crisis, I believe. And when you can address that incongruence between a person's individual purpose and the purpose or strategic direction of an organisation, you start to mend the wound, and you start to actually evolve and grow. And so in one sense, you've got an old system wrestling with the power and dynamism of a new system, which is all about connection and all about co-creation and co-ownership. But at the heart of it, it comes back to a very powerful article that was published by Jeremy Hyman and Henry Timms in I think it was November of 2015, Harvard Business Review, Understanding New Power. Fascinating article that described the war between old power and new power, which is essentially one of the key concepts that I unpack in my book. Old power is something that is fought for and gained, and once it's won, it's fiercely defended. Whereas new power is, and old power is like a currency, whereas new power is like a current, and it flows, and and it's shared, and new power is interdependent, it's collaborative, it is evolutionary, and it's something that is shared. And that they're the two primary differences, if you think about, between a command and control enterprise and a community per se, and a community or synergist type of organisation that is an interdependent group of networks. And the challenge that many companies face today is this increased demand to provide autonomy and interdependence for employees and stakeholders. The increased demands to co-design and co-create products and services with their stakeholders. For example, things that they want and that are meaningful and relevant to them. And they just don't know where to begin, because they're so entrenched in their institutional frameworks that no longer sustain where innovation is going, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And as you're talking about the differences between old power and new power, organizations that are stuck in old paradigms and ones that are embracing this co-creative, interdependent methodology, the thought that comes to me actually is, what about leadership? And how fundamental is it to being able to steer an organization in this new direction? Because I had said previously, just a minute ago, that is this no longer leadership followership, or is it an invention of a new style methodology of leadership?
I actually think it's a new style, and I don't say that, like haphazardly. I think it's the challenge. This type of leadership is about learning to be comfortable with what is largely felt and experienced, and it's an intuition, and it's getting comfortable with being, with uncertainty and things like that. And, sure, there are things that are largely known, but there are also things that are largely sensed and interpreted on the fly and as we evolve. And this type of leadership is about that. It's about operating in the in-between.
Oh, yeah. And that's a difficult thing to, I'm wondering actually, is it a difficult thing to teach or to show? Or how does it actually evolve in a person?
It's something that I don't think it's difficult to teach. Because it's something that I've been teaching for quite some time in my work with leadership. But what it really comes down to, it can be a bit terrifying for leaders that only know how to operate in a hierarchy. But the beautiful thing is when you see people in those type of environments really connecting with what's required of them in terms of this new leadership and how they can empower their teams and their people to come on that journey. And it's a really amazing thing to see happening. So I'm working with a large pharmaceuticals business. I have been now for about 8 or 9 months, and their senior comms team and many of their senior leaders across their organisation are just really starting to understand this, and the impact it's having on the way they're actually connecting internally in their culture is quite profound. But it hasn't been without its challenges, because what we're actually talking about is an internal movement and creating ripples that help people connect with a new way of thinking and working. So innovation per se becomes a daily way of working rather than innovation for innovation's sake. If that's I haven't really coined it like that before, but it's like, it's a way of working and a way of perceiving an environment and a way of being. It's curiosity. It's it's being agile. It's a whole bunch of things that it's not being comfortable with not knowing, and learning to sense their way. What's his name? Frederick Laloux talks about this in his book, Reinventing Organizations, where he talks about the conditions for emergence. And I love it because he's saying that, when you get all these things in place and you create the environment for emergence, everything is impacted. Nothing is independent from another area. They're just all like, everything is interdependent, and a change in one element ripples through all of the others, and it really is just it's a new way of being for leaders. And I certainly don't have all the answers. I'm just talking about my own experiences, but I've seen, and I'm getting asked a lot more often in my work to help leaders get comfortable with this uncertainty. It's like certainty has been a thing that Jonathan Fields, who's a good friend of mine and also from New York, he once said to me, he was here in Australia and we were hanging out, and he said, "Stephen, creating certainty is the killer of dreams." And if you take it from that basic premise, right, certainty, the need to create certainty kills the intangible, and it doesn't kill it. It just shuts it down. It stops the sensing and the just being able to flow and flourish. And yeah, I'm starting to riff a bit here, but yeah.
No, it's awesome. So as you're talking about this difference in terms of ripple effect and interdependence and interconnectivity versus the command and control, the silos, the linearity, and so on, I'm imagining the people who have known nothing but silos and command and control and linearity, how difficult, challenging, and traumatizing it is to go to something more fluid. So how do you support those people? How do you help them make the shift? Because this is basically a leadership thinking developmental shift, which is very significant and can be very. So what are your tips for that in terms of helping them through that?
Well, I believe, Zoe, that silos aren't the problem, and I don't think that that silos. I think that silos are full of really smart, savvy people. I think what the problem has been in siloed organisations is the lack of connectivity between silos. So when I start working with institutions, with an institutional business, for example, like a large bank or a financial services company or whatever, the first thing I do is I look at how we can create stronger connections between their silos. And I'm thinking of a conversation I had with a very senior leader at NAB a few years ago, and he was saying to me, we were talking about innovation, and he said, as a bank, we're able to mobilise extraordinary talent to look at customer innovation and customer experiments, and he said our challenge is not about being able to do that innovation. He goes, it's about sharing that innovation across our business. And I was like, wow, that's fascinating. Are we talking about lack of connectivity here? And he said, yes, that's exactly what we're talking about. And so I think for leaders that only know that institutional construct and a very top-down way of leadership, really the way I work with them is we start small. It's like, let's find out where change is already happening in the organisation, and let's look at that and help that flourish, and what can we learn from that, and what kind of examples can we create for others in and around those things or those conditions, because it's often whilst there are generic things that help a movement flourish and this new type of leadership. Every organisation is different, and they have their own unique cultural traits, and we have to actually be mindful of those things and not try and put on to them something that is that just won't stick. We want something that's going to come from within, that they've co-created themselves, that they believe in, that they feel like they can support and be a part of and contribute to. So it's and there's the cold hard aspect of this change, and that is that some leaders in themselves as individuals just aren't ready, and don't have the level of conscious awareness to be who they need to be and who their people need them to be, and that's a tough one, because you can't force a conscious awakening on a leader. Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. And those people really struggle. They find themselves in a context which requires different kind of leadership, different kind of awareness. And they find themselves floundering, not because they're not competent, it's just they don't have the perception yet. And unless they've got some sort of support and guidance to help them reach for those new insights and those new ways of being, they will suffer, and the organization will suffer alongside them.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And that's why I talk about emergence as being an invitation to be something more. When we're talking about conscious leadership, we're actually talking about a change that happens within an individual first before it happens in a team and then an organisation culturally. And so I think there are just two different types of CEOs. There are CEOs that are just looking for an exit, and they're looking to do their term, and then there are CEOs that are really looking to transform and disrupt the status quo and to innovate stuff that has impact, and they're really passionate about their business addressing complex social problems in society, and how can they, in their daily operation as a business, how can they address some of those issues for greater impact? And so one is black and one is white, yin and yang. And I think there's a big in between, and I think the in between part is the transformation, and it's the leveling up, and it's the evolution from one context to another. But I think all leaders can change. Just takes some are more adaptable or readily adaptable to it than others,
and also ready for it. Yeah, as we mentioned before. So they're adaptable and also ready to adapt.
Correct. Yeah.
I love your observation, though, is that I agree. I think the black and white difference between CEOs that are just interested in doing their time, rather than getting the job done and then getting out, versus those who want to step and make a greater social contribution. It is an advanced level of leadership thinking, because I've been thinking about this a lot too, is that there's varying degrees of awareness and attention and capacity going from survival mode to transactional to transformational. And in between there, between transactional and transformational, the thing that is the missing piece, which you just mentioned, is the social challenge or the social transformation, where you go beyond just achieving goals for yourself and your organization to thinking about the larger community in the global sense as well as in the local sense. And when you make that transition, where your scope of responsibility or calling is to make a change on a human level, then that's, I think, a sign that you're being called forward and being invited, if you like, for a conscious emergence that will make a lasting impact. And sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I think it's a bit of a tipping point between that transaction and transformational part, and there's a lot of inertia that can go on in that space as people are trying to sense where, what that invitation for their business is or for their leadership is.
Yeah, because people don't know what to focus on. And the Young conference I ran earlier this year was all about that. It's about how individual leaders and individual businesses can make a social contribution in small ways and big ways. And one of the biggest challenges is, like, where do I start? Which cause do I throw myself into, because there's such a plethora of them? And I think it comes back, the solution I offered was that you start with yourself first. What's most important to you? What are the causes that are most important to you? Where are your values? And then you spin outwards from there. I don't think you just grab a cause and run with it. I think that's the wrong way to go about doing it. It's got to be, as you said from the beginning, it's got to be the fire, the passion that will carry you through. It's not just about picking a cause and building on it because it's good for business. So
that's
critical.
Yeah, and when I talk about helping organisations co-create a higher purpose, that's exactly what I mean. It's like it's silly to think that you could get every single person in an organisation believing in the company vision and the strategy for the company, but when the company says to its people, or the senior leaders like CEO and executives say, hey, this is what we're about as a company, but we believe that there's a higher purpose that can galvanise all of us to do meaningful work and to contribute interdependently to make a huge impact. when they start to have those kind of conversations and they invite their people to co-create a higher purpose, really amazing, like extraordinary stuff starts to happen. So they're not just going through the motions around the day-to-day. They're actually, every single person in the organisation has been invited to have a voice and contribute to the design of this higher purpose. What is it we want to, what is the legacy we want to leave? What is the impact we want to create? How can I play an active role in making that happen? That's a powerful thing.
Oh, it is extraordinary when that happens. And it does take the courage and the vision of that leader to initiate those conversations and let it foster it, facilitate it, to allow that co-creation to happen. I just got goosebumps as you were talking through that, because the power of that, the ripple effect, goes beyond the organization in a huge way. And if we could showcase and celebrate more of the leaders and organizations that are doing this, then the change, the transformational change on a planetary basis will accelerate. That's why I'm so excited about your book, because you showcase a number of different organizations in it, as well as the tools, the practical tools about going about building an organization like this.
Yeah, well, the book is, for me, it's been a long time coming. It's taken me, it synthesizes around 10 years of my career, and the experiences and the personal and professional transformation that happened along the way. And there were times when I was writing it where I just felt like I just wanted to throw it all in, because I was just like, wow, is this really worth it? You know, it's so much work and it's so much, but I just felt compelled to keep going somehow. And the book is split into 3 parts. So the first part is innovation. The second part is transformation, and the third part is evolution. And you can look at it as being why, what, and how. And the first part is about why this transformation is needed. Why is conscious leadership in the world having such a big impact, and personally and professionally, and what do businesses need to do in order to survive and thrive? What does flourishing versus just existing look like? And then some really practical tools around how they can, changes that they can implement, and a very clear system and tools to help them diagnose what type of a culture they have, and based on what outcomes are revealed around that. I've got this little thing called a culture quadrant, which I spent a long time developing. 4 modes of culture: controllers, pioneers, mimics, and synergists. And each of them have a shadow and light aspect, a state of integration versus a state of disintegration, and a blind spot. So, and it's non-judgmental. So even if you're a controller, doesn't mean you're a bad type of company. It means just you're more like a hierarchical type institutional enterprise, versus a pioneering startup who is all about disruption. And wherever you land on that culture quadrant, you can, there are things that you can do to be kick-ass and awesome. And there are things to really watch out for so that you mitigate risk. Even when you're a synergist, which is like the optimum in terms of an emergent type of enterprise. If a synergist type organisation who is all about co-creation and interdependence, if they lose vital connectivity to their core purpose, they end up with having what I call emergent chaos. So there's shadow and light in all types of organisations, and watch out, but also incredible opportunity.
Oh, that's beautiful. I cannot wait to plow through your book in exquisite detail and soak up all of your wisdom. I have one formal question left, and then some informal one informal question. So the formal question is, throughout the book, you've got the flower of life symbol there. And I'm curious about that. What does that mean for the book, and how is that infusing the book?
I'm so glad you asked that question. I love sacred geometry, and for probably, I reckon at least half of my lifetime, I have been fascinated with spirals and the golden ratio and self-similar curves and the relationship between math and science and nature, and like the Fibonacci sequence, for example, and the perpetual spiral. And if you start to look at the Fibonacci equation and the concept of spirals, you start to see them everywhere, and in time and in matter and like in things, you just start to go, wow, there's a spiral there. And it's just when you start to go down that path and you start to explore spirals, you start to see incredible patterns. And the flower of life is actually one of the core sacred geometric symbols that is created through the spiral, and the perpetual spiral keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. And in my book, if you actually hold the book on its side and you fan the pages, there's a sacred geometric symbol in the top right-hand corner which builds into Metatron's cube, which is supposedly the sacred geometric symbol from which all symbols in the universe are created. And it's all at the heart of it is a spiral. And that's so the tree of the seed of life, the flower of life, all of those incredibly beautiful patterns are formed from spirals. So that's the very geeky kind of designery, mystical answer to that question.
It's extraordinary. I love it. It's just a beautiful overlay infusion of the book, and I think it's lovely. And it's amazing that you got the printer to be able to handle that. That's even also more difficult than people can imagine.
I must say, I'm really thrilled with the design of the book. Like the publisher, my publisher Wiley, did an amazing job in retaining the integrity to my concepts around the relationship between sacred geometry and movements, for example, because a movement is effectively, when I talk about connection, initiation and transference and ripples, what we're actually talking about is creating a spiral from one person to the next, and so that's continuously expansive through that connection. And so I've tried to sort of bring a beautiful visual overlay in the book to help people understand, the science behind the movement and what we're actually really talking about here in terms of transforming a culture.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Stephen, thank you so much. I have one final question, and maybe it's not as frivolous as I think it is. And it's if you've read Tim Ferriss's latest book called Tools of Titans, where he's interviewed all these amazing people, from entrepreneurial leaders to spiritual practitioners to different celebrities to different authors. And for his interviews and for the collection of interviews for the book, he asked them all, what is your spirit animal? So I like that question, and I want to ask it of you. So what is your spirit animal? And if you don't know, what's your best guess?
I reckon my spirit animal is a wolf.
Oh, cool. And why do you think wolf?
I've always loved wolves. I think, first of all, I think they're beautiful. But just their ability to survive, the way they collaborate, often we think of wolves and we think of a really dark, evil kind of, hunting and ferocious and all. But I look at Jungle Book, for example, the story of Mowgli, and the wolves raising him as a baby in their pack, and when you see a whole different side to the almost like the tribal nature of wolves. And I don't know, I haven't really kind of had this read in me, or but I've always just felt, my spirit animal's a wolf. Or and I could have said, an eagle, and because I soar above the clouds, but no, I just don't. I don't really think about it like that. But I just think, a wolf. I've always loved wolves, and I think there's something wise about them too, which I saw an extraordinary image online the other day on Facebook, speaking of wolves, and it showed the whole pack of wolves. There was about 30 of them, and they were walking through the snow. And at the very front, the sick and the wounded wolves and the really old wolves were at the very front of the pack. And in the middle were, the healthy kind of, ones. And then at the very back, there was one wolf walking on its own, and it was the leader. And the story unpacked, it was like the alpha wolf was at the very back, very last, walking away from the rest of the pack. And he was like protecting from sideline attacks and behind attacks. And it was just an extraordinary image. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And I was like, I think on that basis, I'm happy to be a wolf, and I hope I can be a wise leading wolf.
That's beautiful, and what a great image to finish the interview on. So, Stephen, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I'm so excited for your book and the difference it's going to make to folks. If you want to, I'll post a bunch of links. I've taken 1,000 notes as Stephen was talking, and I'm going to put those on my webpage at zoerouth.com/podcast/emergent, and there'll be links to Stephen's book, his site, a couple of the books he talked about, and the article that he referenced. So there's some goodies happening there. So in the meantime, thank you so much, Stephen.
Brilliant, Zoe. Thank you so much. I've had so much fun on this call, and all the best.
Thanks.